A bruised woman replaces her injured mother as a maid in the home of Brooklyn's most feared mafia boss, only to discover the monster everyone warned her about sees the scars she's been hiding and refuses to let the man who put them there walk free. When her violent stepfather returns armed and desperate to reclaim control, Lena must choose between running from the darkness or standing beside the one man brutal enough to end it forever. If you want to see how far a broken nurse and a ruthless kingpin can push each other toward redemption, stay with me until the very end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. Rain came down sideways the night Lena Voss climbed out of the yellow cab outside the Malone estate gates. 24 years old, with a nursing degree she'd barely finished, and bruises she couldn't afford anyone to see. The iron bars rose 12 feet high, black and wet and immovable, like something built to keep the whole world locked on one side or the other. She stood there getting soaked, her single duffel bag pressed against her ribs, staring up at the mansion beyond the gates while every instinct she owned screamed at her to get back in the cab and disappear. But she couldn't. Her mother was inside that house somewhere, injured and alone, and Lena had spent too many years watching Clara Voss get hurt to leave her now. The intercom crackled to life before Lena could press the button. "Name!" The voice was male, clipped, impatient. Lena swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "Lena Voss, I'm here to replace my mother." Silence stretched long enough that she wondered if they'd forgotten her entirely. Then the gates groaned open, metal scraping against metal, and Lena forced her legs to move forward even though everything inside her wanted to run the other direction. The driveway curved through manicured hedges that looked too perfect for Brooklyn, too clean for a place run by men who made their money in blood and fear. Lena had heard the stories her whole life. Everyone in their neighborhood had. Rhett Malone controlled half the borough's underground operations and owned the loyalty of men who would kill without asking questions. He was the kind of man mothers warned their daughters about, the kind newspapers called a monster when they thought he wasn't listening. And now Lena was walking straight into his home because her mother had fallen down a staircase 2 days ago and couldn't work. Except Clara Voss hadn't fallen. Boyd Carew, Lena's stepfather, had shoved her. Lena's hands curled into fists inside the pockets of her jacket, fingernails biting into her palms hard enough to hurt. She'd watched it happen. Watched Boyd come home drunk and enraged about something meaningless. Watched him grab Clara by the shoulders and throw her backward into the railing. Watched her mother crumple at the bottom of the stairs with blood running from a gash above her eyebrow, while Boyd stood at the top breathing hard and swearing it was an accident. It wasn't an accident. Nothing Boyd did was ever an accident. Lena had patched her mother up in the bathroom afterward, hands shaking while she cleaned the wound and wrapped Clara's sprained wrist, and listened to her mother beg her not to call the police, because calling the police meant losing the apartment. It meant Boyd getting arrested and Clara losing the only income they had. It meant Lena's younger brother Marcus getting pulled into foster care because Clara couldn't prove she could support him alone. So Lena hadn't called. She'd done what her mother asked. She'd kept quiet. And now she was here, standing outside the front entrance of a mansion that looked like it belonged in a different century, ready to replace the woman who couldn't walk without limping because her husband had put her at the bottom of a staircase. The door opened before Lena could knock. A man in his 50s stood in the doorway, dressed in a crisp black suit that probably cost more than Lena's entire education. His expression was neutral, but his eyes moved over her like a scanner, cataloging everything from her soaked clothes to the duffel bag clutched against her side. "You're late," he said flatly. Lena blinked rain out of her eyes. "The cab." "I don't care about the cab. You were supposed to be here an hour ago." He stepped aside, gesturing her into the foyer. "Your mother is upstairs resting. You'll sleep in the staff quarters on the second floor. Work starts at 6 tomorrow morning. Don't be late again." Lena stepped inside, water dripping off her jacket onto polished marble floors that gleamed under chandelier light. The house smelled like expensive wood polish and something faintly floral she couldn't identify. Everything was too clean, too precise, like a museum where people weren't supposed to actually live. The man closed the door behind her with a heavy thud that echoed through the entryway. "My name is Anton," he continued, already moving toward a hallway on the left. "I manage the household staff. You'll answer to me. The rules are simple. Don't ask questions. Don't go into rooms you haven't been assigned to clean. Don't speak to Mr. Malone unless he speaks to you first. And whatever you see or hear inside this house stays inside this house. Understood?" Lena nodded, her throat too tight to answer out loud. Anton led her through a maze of hallways lined with dark wood paneling and expensive paintings Lena didn't recognize. The house felt bigger on the inside than it looked from the outside, like it went on forever in all directions. They passed a library filled with leather-bound books, a dining room with a table long enough to seat 20 people, and a sitting room decorated in shades of deep green and gold that made Lena think of old money and older secrets. Finally, Anton stopped at a narrow staircase tucked into a corner near the kitchen. "Staff quarters," he said, nodding toward the stairs. "Your mother is in the third room on the right. You'll share with her until she's well enough to return to her own apartment. Breakfast is at 5:30 in the kitchen. Don't be late." He turned and walked away before Lena could say thank you or ask any of the 100 questions tangled up in her chest. She climbed the stairs slowly, exhaustion settling into her bones like lead. The second floor was quieter than the first, dimmer, less polished. The walls were plain white and the floors were simple hardwood instead of marble. This was where the people who kept the mansion running lived, out of sight, out of mind, invisible unless someone needed something. Lena found the third door on the right and pushed it open carefully. Her mother was asleep in a narrow bed against the far wall, one arm draped across her stomach, her face turned toward the window. The bruise on her cheekbone had darkened to a deep purple, and the bandage Lena had wrapped around her wrist was still in place. She looked small in the dim light, fragile in a way that made Lena's chest ache. Lena set her duffel bag down beside the second bed and sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at her mother's sleeping face. This was the woman who had raised her alone after Lena's father died when she was 6. The woman who had worked double shifts at diners and laundromats to keep food on the table. The woman who had smiled through exhaustion and told Lena she could be anything she wanted if she worked hard enough. And then Boyd Carew had walked into their lives 5 years ago, all charm and promises, and slowly turned their home into a place where fear lived in every corner. Lena's hands curled into fists again. She was done being afraid. She was done watching her mother get hurt. And if working inside the home of Brooklyn's most dangerous man was what it took to keep Clara safe, then that was exactly what Lena would do. Morning came too early. Lena woke to the sound of her mother moving carefully around the small room, trying not to wake her. She sat up slowly, rubbing exhaustion out of her eyes, and found Clara already dressed in a plain black uniform, her hair pulled back into a neat bun despite the fact that her hands were shaking. "Mom," Lena said quietly, "you're supposed to be resting." Clara turned, her expression tight with pain she was trying to hide. "I can manage. You can't even lift your arm without wincing." Lena stood and crossed the room, gently taking her mother's hand. "Sit down. I'll handle today." "Lena, sit." Clara hesitated, then sank onto the edge of the bed with a sigh that sounded like surrender. "Anton won't be patient with mistakes. You need to learn the routines exactly right, or what?" Lena interrupted. "He'll fire me? Let him. You're hurt, and I'm not letting you work like this." Clara's eyes filled with something that looked like guilt and exhaustion mixed together. "I should never have brought you here." Lena crouched in front of her mother, meeting her gaze. "You didn't bring me here. I came because you needed me. That's different." Clara reached out with her good hand and brushed a strand of hair out of Lena's face, the gesture so familiar it hurt. "You were supposed to be starting your nursing job next month. You were supposed to have a future." "I still will," Lena said firmly, "but right now you need me here, so that's where I'm staying." She stood and grabbed the uniform her mother had laid out on the chair, a simple black dress with long sleeves and a white apron. It fit well enough. Lena tied her hair back the same way her mother had, checked her reflection in the small mirror above the dresser, and forced herself to look calm even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. Downstairs, the kitchen was already full of movement. 2 other women were preparing breakfast at the stove, their hands moving quickly and efficiently, while a younger man set plates and silverware on a large tray. No one looked up when Lena entered. No one acknowledged her at all. Anton appeared in the doorway a moment later, his expression as unreadable as it had been the night before. "You're on time," he said, and it almost sounded like approval. "Good. You'll start with the upstairs guest rooms. Strip the beds, dust the furniture, Vacuum the floors. Don't touch anything on the desks or nightstands. Don't open any drawers. Work quickly and quietly. Mr. Malone doesn't like to be disturbed." Lena nodded, her throat dry. Anton handed her a ring of keys and a list of room numbers written in neat handwriting. "These are the rooms you're responsible for today. Finish by noon. If you have questions, ask me. Don't bother the other staff." He walked away before she could respond, leaving Lena standing alone in the middle of the kitchen with a keyring in one hand and a growing sense that she'd just stepped into a world where the rules were different and the consequences for breaking them were permanent. She spent the morning moving through the mansion like a ghost, cleaning rooms that looked like they'd never been used. The guest suites were massive, each one larger than the entire apartment she'd grown up in, decorated with furniture that probably cost more than her mother made in a year. Lena worked methodically, folding hospital corners into bedsheets the way she'd learned in nursing school, dusting baseboards and windowsills with the same precision she used to clean surgical trays. It was mindless work and she was grateful for it. Mindless meant she didn't have to think about Boyd or the bruises hidden beneath her sleeves or the fact that she was scrubbing floors inside a house owned by a man who could make people disappear if he wanted to. By 11:30, she'd finished all the rooms on her list except one, the master bedroom. Lena stood outside the heavy wooden door for a long moment, staring at the brass handle like it might bite her. Anton's instructions had been clear. Don't touch anything personal, don't linger, get in and out as quickly as possible. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined the far wall, overlooking the estate grounds and the city skyline beyond. The furniture was dark wood and leather, expensive but not ostentatious, and the bed was neatly made with crisp white sheets that didn't look like they'd been slept in. Lena moved quickly, starting with the windows. She wiped down the glass with careful strokes, making sure not to leave streaks, her sleeves sliding up slightly as she reached for the top corner. That was when she heard the door open behind her. Lena froze. Footsteps crossed the room slowly, deliberate, the sound of expensive shoes on hardwood. She didn't turn around. Couldn't turn around. Her pulse was hammering in her ears and her hands had gone cold, and every instinct she had was screaming at her to run. But she couldn't run. Running would make it worse. "You're new." The voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need to be loud to command attention. Lena forced herself to turn around, keeping her eyes down the way her mother had taught her. "Yes, sir," she managed. "I'm replacing my mother while she recovers." Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Lena risked a glance upward. Rhett Malone stood 10 feet away, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been tailored specifically for his frame. He was taller than she'd expected, broad-shouldered, with sharp gray eyes that looked like they could cut through steel. His hair was dark, streaked with gray at the temples, and his face was hard in the way faces got when they'd seen too much violence and stopped flinching at it. He wasn't looking at her face, he was looking at her wrist. Lena's stomach dropped. She'd reached too high cleaning the window. Her sleeve had slipped down, and now the bruises were visible. Dark fingerprints wrapped around her forearm like a brand, the kind of marks that only came from someone grabbing hard enough to hurt on purpose. Rhett crossed the room in 3 strides, moving faster than a man his size should be able to move. Lena stumbled backward, her shoulders hitting the window, but there was nowhere left to go. He stopped inches away, his expression unreadable, and reached for her wrist. Lena flinched instinctively, jerking her arm back, but Rhett's hand closed around her forearm anyway. Not rough, not painful, just firm enough to keep her from pulling away. He pushed her sleeve up slowly, revealing the full extent of the bruising. The room went completely silent except for the faint sound of rain starting to fall outside. When Rhett finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, colder. "Who did this?" Lena's breath caught in her throat. She tried to pull her arm back again, but his grip didn't budge. "I fell," she lied automatically, the same lie her mother always used, the same lie every woman who'd ever been hurt by someone stronger learned to tell. Rhett's eyes lifted to hers, and Lena felt the full weight of his attention like a physical thing pressing down on her chest. "You fell," he repeated slowly, like he was tasting the words and finding them rotten. "And when you fell, someone grabbed your arm hard enough to leave fingerprints?" Lena didn't answer, couldn't answer. Rhett let go of her wrist and took a step back, giving her space she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lena. Lena." He said it once, like he was filing it away somewhere permanent. "Who hurt you, Lena?" She shook her head, her throat closing up around words she couldn't say out loud. Rhett studied her for another long moment, his expression shifting into something she couldn't read. Then he turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He stopped with his hand on the doorknob and looked back at her. "When you're ready to tell me the truth," he said quietly, "I'll be downstairs." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Lena stood frozen by the window, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs, staring at the space where Rhett Malone had been standing seconds ago. The most feared man in Brooklyn had just asked her who hurt her. And for the first time in 5 years, Lena realized someone might actually care about the answer. How? She didn't go downstairs. Instead, Lena finished cleaning the master bedroom in a daze, her hands moving on autopilot while her brain tried to process what had just happened. When she was done, she locked the door behind her and made her way back to the staff quarters, where her mother was sitting up in bed reading a worn paperback. Clara looked up when Lena walked in, her expression immediately shifting to concern. "What happened?" Lena sank onto the edge of her own bed and pressed her palms against her eyes. "He saw the bruises." Clara went completely still. "Who saw them?" "Rhett Malone." The paperback slipped from Clara's hands and hit the floor with a soft thud. "Lena?" Clara breathed, her voice tight with fear. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I fell." "Did he believe you?" Lena dropped her hands and met her mother's gaze. "No." Clara stood slowly, wincing as her injured wrist protested the movement. She crossed the room and sat beside Lena, taking her daughter's hand in her own. "You can't tell him the truth," Clara said urgently. "If Boyd finds out you said something—" "I didn't say anything," Lena interrupted. "But Mom, he knew I was lying. He knew." "It doesn't matter what he knows. You can't tell him. Do you understand? Men like Rhett Malone don't help people like us. They use information. They leverage it. If he finds out about Boyd, he'll use it against us somehow, and then we'll be trapped." Lena wanted to argue, wanted to say that maybe, just maybe, someone powerful enough to scare even Boyd might actually be able to help them. But she didn't. Because her mother was probably right. Men like Rhett Malone didn't help people. They destroyed them. Lena avoided the master bedroom for the next 3 days. Anton reassigned her to other parts of the house. The library, the sitting rooms, the guest suites on the 3rd floor. She worked quietly, kept her head down, and tried not to think about the way Rhett Malone had looked at her wrist like he was memorizing every bruise. But on the 4th day, Anton handed her the master bedroom key again. "Mr. Malone requested you specifically," Anton said, his tone neutral. "He wants the room cleaned before noon." Lena's stomach twisted. "Why me?" Anton raised an eyebrow. "I don't ask Mr. Malone why he makes decisions. Neither should you." So Lena found herself standing outside the master bedroom door again, keyring in hand, trying to slow her racing heartbeat. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was empty. Lena exhaled slowly and got to work, moving faster than usual, determined to finish and leave before Rhett came back. She stripped the bed, dusted the furniture, vacuumed the floors, and was halfway through wiping down the windows when she heard the door open behind her. This time she didn't freeze. She turned around slowly, meeting Rhett's gaze head-on. He stood in the doorway, still dressed in a suit, his expression unreadable. "You've been avoiding this room," he said. It wasn't a question. Lena didn't bother lying. "Yes." "Why?" "Because you scare me." The honesty seemed to catch him off guard. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite surprise, but close. Rhett stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. Lena's pulse spiked, but she forced herself to stay still. "I don't want to scare you," Rhett said quietly. "But I need to know who hurt you." "Why?" Lena asked, her voice sharper than she intended. "So you can add it to some file? Use it as leverage later?" Rhett's jaw tightened. "Is that what you think I'd do?" "I don't know what you'd do," Lena shot back. "I don't know you." "Then let me tell you what I will do," Rhett said, his voice dropping into something cold and final. "If someone is putting their hands on you, I will make sure it never happens again. That's not leverage. That's a promise." Lena stared at him, her breath catching in her chest. "Why would you do that?" she whispered. Rhett held her gaze for a long moment before answering. "Because no one should have to walk around carrying bruises like that," he said simply. "And because I have the resources to stop it." Lena's hands were shaking. She didn't want to believe him, didn't want to trust him, but the exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders was heavier than the fear, and she was so tired of lying. "My stepfather," she said finally, the words scraping out of her throat like glass. "Boyd Carew. He's the one who hurt me, and my mother. He's been hurting us for years." Rhett didn't move, didn't react, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. "Where does he live?" he asked. Lena gave him the address. Rhett pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, and slipped it back into his pocket. "Your mother is still here, correct?" he asked. Lena nodded. "She stays," Rhett said firmly. "Both of you stay. Boyd Carew will never touch either of you again." "What are you going to do?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rhett walked toward the door, his expression unreadable again. He paused with his hand on the doorknob and looked back at her. "What needs to be done?" Then he was gone, and Lena was left standing alone in the middle of the master bedroom, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or the smartest decision she'd ever made. Rhett was gone for 2 hours. Lena spent that time sitting on the edge of her bed in the staff quarters, staring at the wall while her mother paced the small room like a caged animal. Clara's face had gone pale the moment Lena told her what she'd done, what she'd said, who she'd told. "You don't understand what you've just started," Clara whispered, her voice shaking. "Men like Rhett Malone don't solve problems. They create new ones." Lena's hands were fisted in her lap, nails digging crescents into her palms. "Boyd was already a problem that's been breaking your bones for 5 years. And now we're indebted to someone worse. You don't know that." Clara stopped pacing and turned to face her daughter, exhaustion carved into every line of her face. "I know that when powerful men do favors, they always collect payment. Always." Lena opened her mouth to respond, but footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Heavy, deliberate, coming toward their door. Both women went silent. The knock was soft, almost polite. Lena stood and opened the door. Anton stood in the hallway, his expression as neutral as ever, but something in his eyes looked different, almost respectful. "Mr. Malone requests your presence in his study," Anton said, looking directly at Lena. "Both of you." Clara's breath hitched audibly. Anton's gaze shifted to her. "Your daughter told Mr. Malone about your situation. He's handled it. Now he wants to speak with you both. I suggest you don't keep him waiting." He turned and walked away before either of them could respond. Lena looked at her mother. Clara's face had gone from pale to gray, her injured hand trembling at her side. "Mom, don't," Clara interrupted quietly. "Don't tell me it's going to be fine. We don't know what he's done. We don't know what he wants in return." "Then let's go find out." Lena took her mother's good hand and led her out of the room, down the narrow staff staircase, through hallways that suddenly felt longer and more suffocating than they had before. Anton was waiting at the bottom of the main staircase, gesturing them toward a corridor Lena hadn't been down yet. The study was at the end of the hall, behind double doors made of dark wood that looked like they weighed 100 pounds each. Anton knocked once, waited for a response Lena couldn't hear, then pushed the doors open. Rhett Malone stood behind a massive desk, his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. His knuckles were scraped raw beneath the edge of his cuffs, fresh blood dried in the creases of his fingers. Lena's stomach dropped. Rhett gestured to the 2 chairs positioned in front of the desk. "Sit." It wasn't a request. Lena and Clara sat. Anton closed the doors behind them and disappeared, leaving them alone with a man who looked like he'd just come back from committing violence. Rhett walked around the desk slowly and leaned against the front edge, arms crossed over his chest, his gray eyes moving between the 2 women with an intensity that made Lena's skin prickle. "Boyd Carew is in the hospital," Rhett said, his voice calm and measured, like he was discussing the weather. 3 broken ribs, shattered nose, dislocated shoulder. "He'll live, but he won't be coming near either of you again." Clara made a small sound in the back of her throat, half relief, half terror. Lena couldn't breathe. Rhett's eyes locked on hers. "He also understands that if he reports what happened, if he tries to retaliate in any way, the consequences will be significantly worse. I made that very clear." "What did you do to him?" Lena whispered. Rhett's expression didn't change. I had a conversation. He didn't listen at first, so I made my point more effectively. The casual way he said it sent ice down Lena's spine. Clara was shaking now, her good hand gripping the armrest of the chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Why? Clara asked, her voice barely audible. Why would you do this for us? Rhett shifted his attention to her, and for a moment something almost human flickered across his face. Because I've spent most of my life around men who hurt people weaker than them, he said quietly. And I'm tired of watching it happen when I have the power to stop it. Clara's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Rhett pushed off the desk and moved to the window overlooking the estate grounds, his back to them now, hands in his pockets. You'll both stay here, he continued. Your apartment isn't safe. Boyd knows where you live, and he's got friends who are stupid enough to do him favors. So you stay here until I decide it's secure for you to leave. We can't, Clara started. You can, Rhett interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. And you will. Anton will have your things brought over from the apartment tomorrow. Your son, Marcus, correct? He'll be picked up from school and brought here as well. Clara stood abruptly, swaying slightly, her face flushed with emotion. You can't just take my son. I'm not taking him. Rhett turned to face her, his expression hard again. I'm protecting him. Boyd's been arrested before for assault. He's got a record. If he decides to use Marcus to get back at you, there's nothing stopping him. So your son stays here where Boyd can't reach him. End of discussion. Lena stood and moved beside her mother, placing a steadying hand on Clara's back. Her mother was shaking so hard now it felt like she might collapse. What do you want in return? Lena asked, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her throat. You don't do all this for nothing, so what's the price? Rhett studied her for a long moment, something almost like approval flickering in his eyes. You work, he said simply. Both of you. Same jobs, same pay. The only difference is you're safe while you do it. That's it? Lena pressed. We just keep working here like nothing happened? That's it. Lena didn't believe him, couldn't believe him. Men like Rhett Malone didn't help people without expecting something in return. That was the rule. That was how the world worked. But standing in his study with her mother trembling beside her and blood still drying on his knuckles, Lena couldn't figure out what the catch was. Rhett walked past them toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. One more thing, he said without turning around. If Boyd contacts either of you, calls, texts, shows up anywhere, you tell me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourselves. Don't try to protect him. Just tell me. He opened the door and walked out, leaving Lena and Clara standing in the middle of the study, staring at the space where he'd been. Clara sank back into the chair, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Lena stood frozen, her mind racing through everything that had just happened, trying to find the trap, the angle, the hidden cost. But all she could see was the blood on Rhett Malone's knuckles and the promise in his voice when he said Boyd would never hurt them again. And God help her, she wanted to believe him. Bon Dieu checontes. Marcus arrived the next afternoon in the back of a black SUV, looking small and confused and terrified. He was 14, all sharp elbows and nervous energy, with their father's dark eyes and their mother's stubborn jaw. When he climbed out of the vehicle and saw the mansion, his face went pale. What the hell is going on? He asked, his voice cracking. Lena met him at the front entrance, pulling him into a hug before he could bolt. It's okay. You're safe. I'll explain everything. Marcus pulled back, his eyes searching hers. Mom called me during lunch and said I had to leave school early. She sounded scared. What happened? Where's Boyd? Boyd's in the hospital, Lena said quietly, and he's not coming back. Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to something harder, older. Did you finally call the cops? No. Then what? Come inside, Lena interrupted, taking his arm and guiding him through the front door. I'll tell you everything once you've seen Mom. Clara was waiting in the staff quarters, sitting on the edge of her bed with her hands folded in her lap. When Marcus walked in, she stood so fast she almost fell. He crossed the room in 2 strides and wrapped his arms around her, and Clara broke down completely, sobbing into his shoulder while he held her like he was the parent and she was the child. Lena stood in the doorway and watched them, her chest aching with relief and guilt twisted together so tight she couldn't tell them apart anymore. After Clara calmed down, after Marcus had been given his own small room down the hall, After Anton had delivered their belongings in neat boxes stacked against the walls, Lena found herself alone in the library on the second floor, staring at rows of books she'd never have time to read. That's where Rhett found her. She didn't hear him come in, just looked up from the book she'd been pretending to read and found him standing in the doorway, watching her with that unreadable expression he seemed to wear like armor. "Your brother settled in?" he asked. Lena closed the book and set it on the table beside her. "He's confused, scared, angry, but he's here and he's safe, so I'll take it." Rhett stepped into the library, his hands in his pockets, his movements deliberate and controlled. "He remind you of your father?" Lena blinked, caught off guard. "How do you know about my father?" "I know a lot of things." Rhett moved toward the shelves, trailing his fingers along the spines of books like he was searching for something specific. "James Voss died in a construction accident when you were 6. Your mother raised you and your brother alone until she met Boyd 5 years ago." Lena's pulse quickened. "You looked into us." "I look into everyone who works in my house." Rhett pulled a book from the shelf, a worn medical textbook with annotations filling every margin, and turned to face her. "You graduated top of your class from nursing school. You were supposed to start at Brooklyn Methodist next month. Instead, you're here, scrubbing floors because your mother got hurt." Lena stood slowly, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "If you knew all that, why ask me about the bruises? Why pretend you didn't know what was happening? Because there's a difference between knowing facts and hearing the truth." Rhett set the textbook on the table between them. "Facts are easy. Truth requires trust. And you wanted me to trust you. I wanted you to have the choice." Lena stared at him, trying to read the expression on his face and failing. "Why does it matter to you? We're just staff. We're nobody." Something shifted in Rhett's eyes. Something that looked almost like anger, but not directed at her. "You're not nobody," he said quietly. "And I'm tired of people thinking they have to accept being hurt because they don't have enough power to fight back." Lena's breath caught in her throat. Rhett picked up the medical textbook again, flipping through pages covered in his own handwriting. "I used to want to be a doctor," he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it. "Spent 2 years in pre-med before my father died and everything went to hell. The business he left behind wasn't exactly legal. Someone had to take over or we'd lose everything, so I did." He closed the book and looked at her directly. "I made choices that turned me into someone I never wanted to be," Rhett continued. "But those choices also gave me resources most people don't have. So if I can use those resources to stop someone like Boyd from hurting people like you, then maybe it means something. Maybe it balances the scale a little." Lena didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond to a confession that felt too honest, too raw, too human to come from a man everyone called a monster. "You could go back," she said finally. "Finish medical school, become the person you wanted to be." Rhett's laugh was bitter. "It doesn't work like that. You don't just walk away from this life. It follows you. It owns you. Not if you choose to leave." "And who runs the empire while I'm sitting in lecture halls?" Rhett asked, his tone sharp now. "Who protects the people who depend on me for their safety, their livelihoods? Find someone else. There is no one else I trust." The admission hung between them, heavy and final. Lena took a step closer, her heart pounding. "Then maybe you're in the wrong business." Rhett's eyes locked on hers, and for a moment the air in the library felt too thick to breathe. "Maybe I am," he said quietly. Then he turned and walked out, leaving Lena standing alone among shelves of books neither of them would probably ever read. 3 days passed. Lena fell into a routine that felt surreal in its normalcy. She cleaned rooms, helped Clara with the lighter tasks her mother couldn't manage with a sprained wrist, and made sure Marcus ate breakfast before Anton drove him to school each morning. The house staff stopped treating them like outsiders and started including them in quiet conversations over lunch, sharing gossip about households across the borough, warning them about which rooms to avoid when certain guests visited. But Rhett was a ghost. Lena saw him twice in those 3 days, both times from a distance, dressed in expensive suits, surrounded by men who moved like trained killers. He didn't speak to her, didn't acknowledge her. It was like their conversation in the library had never happened, and that should have been a relief, should have made things easier. But instead, Lena found herself listening for his footsteps in the hallways, glancing toward doorways, hoping he'd walk through, feeling inexplicably disappointed every time he didn't. On the fourth night, she couldn't sleep. Lena lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while her mother snored softly across the room, her mind churning through questions she didn't have answers for. Why had Rhett helped them? Why did he care? What did he actually want? At 2 in the morning, she gave up trying to sleep and slipped out of bed, pulling on a sweater and padding barefoot down the staff staircase. The house was silent, except for the distant hum of security systems and the occasional creak of old wood settling. Lena found herself in the library again, drawn there by instinct or habit or something she couldn't name. She turned on a small reading lamp and pulled a book from the shelf at random, a collection of poetry she'd never heard of, written by someone long dead. She was 3 pages in when she heard the door open behind her. Rhett stood in the doorway, dressed in dark pants and a wrinkled button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked exhausted. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. Lena closed the book. Apparently not. Rhett crossed the room and sank into the chair across from her, leaning back with a sigh that sounded bone-deep. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Rhett broke the silence. "Boyd tried to press charges," he said quietly. "Filed a police report claiming I assaulted him unprovoked." Lena's stomach clenched. What happened? The charges were dropped. Rhett's expression was unreadable. Boyd has a history of domestic violence complaints. When the detectives started asking questions about why I might have paid him a visit, his story fell apart. They found evidence linking him to 3 other assault cases over the past 5 years. He's being charged with battery and intimidation. He'll serve time. Relief flooded through Lena so fast it made her dizzy. He's actually going to jail? For at least 3 years? Probably more. Rhett leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Your mother and brother are safe. You're safe. Boyd can't touch any of you." Lena pressed her hands against her face, feeling tears burn behind her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Something in his tone made her look up. Rhett's expression had shifted into something darker, more dangerous. Boyd wasn't working alone. He's got connections, small-time dealers, low-level muscle. They're not happy I interfered, and they're not smart enough to let it go. Lena's relief evaporated. "What does that mean?" "It means you stay here," Rhett said firmly. "All 3 of you. Until I know for certain there's no retaliation coming." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." Lena stood abruptly, frustration boiling over. "So we're prisoners now?" "You're protected," Rhett corrected, his voice hard. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Lena shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like we traded one cage for another." Rhett stood too, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. "You think this is a cage? You think being kept safe in a house where no one will hurt you is the same as living with a man who broke your mother's bones?" "I think you're making decisions for us without asking what we want," Lena said, her voice shaking with anger she'd been holding back for days. "You decided to beat Boyd up. You decided to bring Marcus here. You decided we're staying indefinitely. When do we get a say?" "When it's safe for you to have one," Rhett growled. "That's not your call to make." "Yes, it is." Rhett's voice rose for the first time since she'd met him, sharp and cutting. "Because I'm the one with the resources to keep you alive. I'm the one who knows what men like Boyd's associates are capable of. And I'm the one who will have to live with it if something happens to you because I let you walk out of here before it was safe." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. Rhett turned away, dragging a hand through his hair, his shoulders rigid with tension. The library went silent except for the sound of their breathing, harsh and uneven. When Rhett spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less intense. "I've spent my entire adult life watching people get hurt because they didn't have anyone powerful enough to protect them," he said without turning around. "I've watched women disappear because they couldn't pay debts their husbands left behind. I've watched children end up in the system because their parents got killed over territory disputes. I've watched good people get destroyed by bad ones simply because they were unlucky enough to be in the wrong place. So forgive me if I'm not willing to take chances with your safety just because you're angry about being protected." Lena's throat tightened. She wanted to stay angry, wanted to hold on to the frustration burning in her chest, but all she could see was the exhaustion carved into Rhett's face and the weight he carried like it might crush him if he ever stopped moving. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Rhett turned to face her, surprise flickering across his features. I'm sorry, Lena repeated. You're right. You did save us, and I'm being ungrateful. You're not ungrateful, Rhett said, his voice softer now. You're scared and angry, and you don't trust me. I don't blame you for any of that. I want to trust you, Lena admitted. I just don't know how. Rhett crossed the room slowly and stopped a few feet away, giving her space to breathe. Then ask me questions, he said. Whatever you want to know. I'll answer honestly. Lena studied his face, searching for the lie, the angle, the trap. She couldn't find it. Why did you really help us? She asked. And don't tell me it's because you're tired of watching people get hurt. There's more to it than that. Rhett was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes holding hers. Then he answered. Because when I saw the bruises on your arm, I saw my mother, he said quietly. She had the same ones. Different man, same story, and I was too young to stop it, too powerless to do anything but watch. So when I got older, when I built this empire and gained the power she never had, I promised myself I'd never stand by and watch again. Lena's breath caught. Rhett continued, his voice rough now. My mother died when I was 19. Heart attack, officially. But I know the truth. Years of being hurt, years of stress and fear, and having nowhere safe to go, it killed her just as surely as if he'd put a gun to her head. So no, Lena, it's not just about being tired of watching. It's about making sure no one else loses their mother the way I lost mine. Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks before she could stop them. She crossed the room and did something completely irrational, completely reckless. She wrapped her arms around Rhett Malone and held on. He went rigid for a moment, clearly not expecting it. Then slowly his arms came up around her, holding her carefully, like she might break. They stood like that for a long time, two broken people finding something like comfort in the middle of a library at 2 a.m. When Lena finally pulled back, Rhett's expression had softened into something almost vulnerable. You should get some sleep, he said quietly. Lena nodded, wiping her eyes. So should you. I will. She turned to leave, then paused at the door and looked back. Rhett? Yeah? Thank you for everything. His eyes held hers across the dimly lit room. You're welcome. Oh. The next morning, everything changed. Lena was cleaning the guest rooms on the 3rd floor when she heard shouting coming from downstairs. She abandoned the vacuum and ran toward the noise, her heart hammering. In the front foyer, Marcus was standing toe-to-toe with one of Rhett's security men, a mountain of muscle named Vincent, his face flushed with anger. I don't care what your boss said, Marcus yelled. I'm not staying here like some prisoner. You're not a prisoner, Vincent said calmly. You're being protected. From what? Boyd's in jail. Marcus. Clara appeared from the hallway, moving as fast as her injured wrist would allow. Stop, please. But Marcus spun to face her, his eyes blazing. Why are you okay with this? We're living in a mobster's house. Do you know what people are saying at school? Do you know what they think we are? I don't care what they think, Clara said firmly. I care that you're safe. I'd rather be unsafe and free than safe in a cage. That's enough. Rhett's voice cut through the argument like a blade. Everyone turned. Rhett stood at the top of the main staircase, dressed in a dark suit, his expression cold and commanding. He descended slowly, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. When he reached the bottom, he looked directly at Marcus. You want to leave? Rhett asked calmly. Marcus lifted his chin defiantly. Yeah, I do. Then go. Clara gasped. Rhett. Rhett raised a hand, silencing her. His eyes never left Marcus. You're 14, Rhett continued, old enough to make your own decisions. If you want to walk out that door and take your chances with whatever's waiting outside, that's your choice. But understand something first. Boyd had friends. Those friends are angry. And if they decide to use you to send a message, there's nothing I can do to stop it once you're outside my protection. Marcus's bravado faltered slightly. Rhett stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. Your mother spent 5 years letting a man break her bones because she thought it was the only way to keep a roof over your head, Rhett said quietly. Your sister gave up her nursing career to come back here and take care of her. They both sacrificed everything to keep you safe. So if you want to throw that away because you're embarrassed about what kids at school think, go ahead. But don't pretend it's about freedom. It's about pride. And pride gets people killed. The foyer went completely silent. Marcus's eyes filled with angry tears. You don't know anything about me. I know you're smarter than this, Rhett said. I know you love your family, and I know you're scared, but running doesn't make the fear go away. It just means you're alone when it catches up to you. Marcus stood there trembling, his hands clenched into fists, clearly torn between running and staying. Then Clara stepped forward and placed her good hand on her son's shoulder. Please, she whispered, just a little longer, until we know it's safe. Marcus looked at his mother, then at Lena, standing frozen at the top of the stairs, then back at Rhett. Fine, he said finally, his voice cracking, but I'm not staying in this house forever. You won't have to, Rhett promised, just long enough. Marcus pulled away from his mother and stormed up the stairs, shouldering past Lena without looking at her. The front door slammed somewhere above them, echoing through the mansion. Clara covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Lena descended the stairs quickly and wrapped her arms around her mother. He'll be okay. He just needs time. Clara nodded against her shoulder, but she didn't stop crying. Rhett stood watching them for a moment, his expression unreadable, then turned and walked away without another word. That night, Lena found Marcus sitting on the roof outside his bedroom window, his legs dangling over the edge, staring at the city lights in the distance. She climbed out carefully and sat beside him, leaving space between them. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Marcus broke the silence. I hate this, he said quietly. I know. I hate that we had to run. I hate that we need his protection. I hate that Mom got hurt. I hate all of it. Lena reached over and took his hand. Me too. Marcus looked at her, his eyes red from crying. Do you trust him? Rhett? Lena thought about the question carefully before answering. I think he's dangerous, she said honestly. I think he's done terrible things, but I also think he meant what he said about protecting us, and right now, that's enough. What if it's not enough? Marcus asked. What if Boyd's friends come after us anyway? What if Rhett can't stop them? Then we deal with it together, Lena said firmly, like we always have. Marcus leaned his head against her shoulder, and Lena wrapped her arm around him, holding him close while the city glowed beneath them and the future remained uncertain. Hours later, when Marcus had finally gone to bed and the house had settled into silence, Lena found herself standing outside Rhett's study. She could see light beneath the door, hear the faint sound of papers rustling. She knocked softly. Come in. Lena pushed the door open. Rhett sat behind his desk, surrounded by files and documents, his tie loosened and his jacket draped over the chair. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. It's late, he said. So is your workday, apparently. Rhett gestured to the files. Empire doesn't run itself. Lena closed the door behind her and crossed the room, stopping in front of the desk. Thank you for what you said to Marcus today. He needed to hear it. He's angry. I don't blame him. He's also scared. We all are. Rhett leaned back in his chair, studying her. What do you need, Lena? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither of them wanted to name. I need to know we're not making a mistake, Lena said finally. I need to know that trusting you won't destroy us worse than Boyd ever could. Rhett stood slowly and walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of responsibility carved into every line of his face. I can't promise you that, he said quietly. I can't promise my protection won't come with consequences. But I can promise that as long as you're under my roof, no one will hurt you. Not Boyd, not his friends, not anyone. Lena's breath hitched. And what happens when we're not under your roof anymore? She asked. Rhett's jaw tightened. Then we'll deal with that when it comes. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was the only answer he could give. Lena reached up and placed her hand against his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palm, steady, strong, alive. You're not the monster they say you are, she whispered. Rhett covered her hand with his own, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. Yes, I am, he said softly. But maybe around you I can be something else too. The space between them felt charged with something dangerous and inevitable. Lena should have stepped back, should have walked away, should have remembered that men like Rhett Malone didn't save people without eventually destroying them. But instead she stayed exactly where she was, her hand pressed against his chest, his fingers wrapped around hers. And somewhere in the silence of that study, with the city breathing outside the windows and danger lurking just beyond the gates, Lena realized she'd already made her choice. She just didn't know yet if it would save her or ruin her. Lena didn't pull her hand away. Neither did Rhett. They stood there in the dim light of his study, the air between them crackling with something neither of them had the courage to name, until Rhett's phone buzzed violently on the desk behind them. The spell broke. Rhett released her hand and turned to grab the phone, his expression shifting from vulnerable to unreadable in the span of a heartbeat. He looked at the screen and his jaw tightened. "I need to take this," he said, his voice clipped. Lena nodded and stepped back, creating distance that felt suddenly necessary. "I should go anyway. It's late." She was halfway to the door when Rhett answered the call. "What?" His tone was sharp, commanding, all business. Then silence as whoever was on the other end spoke. Rhett's shoulders went rigid. "When?" Lena paused with her hand on the doorknob. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Rhett said. "Don't move him until I arrive." He ended the call and stood there staring at the phone, his knuckles white around the device. "What happened?" Lena asked quietly. Rhett looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something that looked like genuine concern cross his face. "One of Boyd's associates was just picked up trying to break into your old apartment," he said. "He had a gun and a list of addresses. Yours, your mother's workplace, Marcus's school." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Lena's feet. "He was coming for us," she whispered. "He was going to hurt whoever he found first and leave evidence pointing back to me," Rhett corrected grimly. "Make it look like I couldn't protect you. Undermine my credibility." Is anyone hurt?" "No. My men intercepted him before he got inside." Rhett grabbed his jacket from the chair and shrugged it on with sharp, angry movements. "But this confirms what I suspected. Boyd's crew is making a move. They're not smart enough to let this go." Lena's mind was racing, terror and rage tangled together so tight she couldn't separate them. "What are you going to do?" Rhett crossed the room and stopped directly in front of her, his gray eyes hard as stone. "I'm going to end this. Permanently." The way he said it sent ice down Lena's spine. "Rhett, stay in the house," he interrupted. "Don't go anywhere. Don't answer the door. I'll have Vincent posted outside your room." "How long will you be gone?" "As long as it takes." He moved past her and was out the door before she could respond, his footsteps echoing down the hallway like gunshots. Lena stood alone in the study, her heart hammering against her ribs, staring at the space where Rhett had been moments ago. Something about this felt wrong. Not wrong like danger. Wrong like a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit but everyone was forcing into place anyway. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something critical. Rhett didn't come back that night, or the next morning. By noon the following day, the house felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. The staff moved through their routines with tense efficiency, speaking in low voices, glancing toward the front entrance like they expected something terrible to walk through it at any moment. Clara stayed in the staff quarters with her door locked, too frightened to come out. Marcus paced his room like a caged animal, his anxiety so palpable Lena could feel it through the walls. And Lena cleaned. She cleaned everything she could reach, scrubbing baseboards until her hands cramped, polishing silver until she could see her reflection, organizing supply closets that didn't need organizing. She needed to move, needed to do something with the fear crawling under her skin like insects. At 3 p.m, Anton found her in the library, dusting books that probably hadn't been touched in years. "Mr. Malone called," Anton said, his voice carefully neutral. "He'll be back tonight. He wants you to meet him in his study at 8. Lena set down the duster, her hands trembling slightly. "Did he say what happened?" "No, and I didn't ask." Anton's expression softened almost imperceptibly. But he sounded different, tired. After Anton left, Lena tried to go back to cleaning, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She gave up and went to check on her mother instead. Clara was sitting on her bed staring at the wall, her injured wrist cradled against her chest. "Mom?" Clara looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "Is it over?" "I don't know," Lena admitted. "Rhett's coming back tonight. He wants to talk to me." Clara's expression shifted into something Lena couldn't read. Fear, maybe. Or resignation. "Lena, Clara said quietly. I need to tell you something. Something in her mother's tone made Lena's stomach clench. What? Clara stood slowly and crossed to the window, keeping her back to Lena. Boyd didn't just have connections to small-time dealers. He was laundering money for someone bigger, someone connected to Rhett's organization. The room went very still. What are you talking about? Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Clara turned to face her, tears streaming down her cheeks. Boyd was working for one of Rhett's rivals. That's why he was so confident, why he never worried about consequences. He thought he was protected. Lena felt like she'd been punched in the chest. How long have you known this? Since yesterday. One of the other staff told me. She heard it from her husband, who works security. Clara's voice broke. Lena, Rhett didn't just beat Boyd up to protect us. He did it to send a message to his competition. We were never the point. We were just collateral damage in a war we don't understand. No, Lena said automatically. That's not... He wouldn't... Wouldn't he? Clara crossed the room and grabbed Lena's shoulders. He's a mobster, Lena. This is what they do. They use people. They manipulate situations to their advantage, and we walked right into it. Lena pulled away, her mind spinning. You don't know that. You don't know what his intentions were. Then ask him, Clara said desperately. Tonight, when you see him, ask him the truth. Ask him if Boyd was working for his rivals. Ask him if helping us was really about protection or about sending a message. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to defend Rhett, but the words died in her throat because she realized with horrifying clarity that she didn't actually know the answer. She'd trusted him based on instinct and desperation, and the way he'd looked at her in the study last night like she was something precious instead of disposable. But trust wasn't the same as truth, and she'd been lied to by men before. At 8 o'clock, Lena knocked on the door to Rhett's study. Come in. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. Rhett stood by the window with his back to her, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, his shirt wrinkled and stained with something dark near the collar. He looked like he hadn't slept in 48 hours. Close the door, he said without turning around. Lena did. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Is it over? Lena asked finally. Yes. What does that mean? Rhett turned to face her, and Lena's breath caught at the exhaustion carved into his features. He looked older somehow, worn down in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness and everything to do with the weight of violence carried too long. It means Boyd's crew won't be a problem anymore, Rhett said flatly. They've been dealt with. The threat is neutralized. Dealt with how? You don't want to know the details. Yes, I do, Lena said, her voice harder than she intended. I want to know exactly what you did and why you did it. Rhett's eyes narrowed slightly. Why are you asking me this? Because I need to know if my mother's right. Right about what? Lena crossed the room slowly, forcing herself to hold his gaze even though every instinct screamed at her to look away. Was Boyd working for one of your rivals? The question landed like a grenade. Rhett's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. Who told you that? He asked carefully. Does it matter? Yes, it matters, because whoever told you is playing a dangerous game spreading that kind of information. So it's true, Lena said, her heart sinking. Rhett was silent for a long moment. Then he moved to his desk and poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, his movements deliberate and controlled. Boyd was small time, Rhett said finally, but he was connected to a crew that's been trying to muscle in on my territory for months. They were using him to launder cash through construction sites. When I found out you and your mother were living with him, I saw an opportunity. The words hit Lena like a physical blow. An opportunity, she repeated, her voice shaking. That's what we were to you. An opportunity. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Lena demanded, anger flooding through her veins like fire. Because it sounds like you used us as an excuse to go after your competition. It sounds like everything you did, bringing us here, protecting us, pretending to care, was just strategy. Rhett set the glass down hard enough that Lena heard it crack. I didn't pretend anything. Then tell me the truth, Lena shouted. Did you help us because you actually cared or because it gave you an excuse to take down someone who was threatening your empire? Both! Rhett's voice rose to match hers, sharp and cutting. Yes, Boyd was connected to people I needed to deal with. Yes, going after him served my interests. But that doesn't change the fact that he was hurting you. That doesn't change the fact that watching him break your mother's bones made me want to put him in the ground. So which was it? Lena pressed, her hands curled into fists. Did you save us? Or did you use us? Rhett closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his eyes blazing. Why can't it be both? Why does it have to be one or the other? I'm not a hero, Lena. I'm not some white knight who rides in to save people out of the goodness of his heart. I'm a criminal. I run an empire built on violence and fear. Everything I do serves that empire first. But that doesn't mean I don't care what happens to you. How am I supposed to believe that? Lena's voice cracked. How am I supposed to trust anything you say when you've been lying to me from the beginning? I never lied to you, Rhett growled. I told you exactly who I was. I told you I wasn't a good man. You chose to stay anyway. Because I thought you were protecting us. I am protecting you. No, you're protecting your interests. We just happen to be convenient. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and brutal and irreversible. Rhett's jaw clenched so tight Lena could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. He turned away from her, his hands braced against the desk, his shoulders rigid with tension. When he spoke again, his voice was low and dangerous. You want the truth? Here it is. Yes, I used the situation with Boyd to justify taking down a crew that's been a thorn in my side for months. Yes, it served my purposes. But I also meant every word I said to you, every promise I made. Boyd is in jail. His crew is gone. You and your family are safe. That's not a lie. That's not manipulation. That's me doing exactly what I said I would do. While also benefiting yourself, Lena said bitterly. Welcome to my world, Rhett shot back. Nothing is clean. Nothing is simple. Every decision serves multiple purposes. That's how you survive in this business. Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I can't do this. Rhett turned to face her, his expression shifting from anger to something that looked almost like panic. Can't do what? This. Whatever this is. I can't be part of your world where everything is a transaction and everyone is a piece on a chessboard. Lena, my mother was right, Lena interrupted, her voice breaking. We walked right into this. We let ourselves believe you were different, but you're not. You're exactly what everyone says you are. The words seemed to hit Rhett harder than any physical blow could have. He crossed the room toward her, but Lena stepped back, keeping distance between them. Don't, she said quietly. Don't try to convince me I'm wrong. Don't try to make this sound better than it is. Just let us go. You're safe here, Rhett said, his voice rough. Out there, Boyd's crew might be gone, but there are always more threats, always more people looking for leverage. Then we'll deal with it ourselves, like we did before you showed up. Before I showed up, your mother had a broken wrist, and you had bruises you were trying to hide, Rhett reminded her sharply. Before I showed up, you were trapped in an apartment with a man who could have killed either of you at any moment. So don't stand there and tell me you were better off without me. Maybe we weren't better off, Lena admitted, but at least we knew what we were dealing with. At least we knew Boyd was a monster. We didn't make the mistake of thinking he was something else. The accusation landed like a knife between them. Rhett's expression went completely blank, and somehow that was worse than anger. Fine, he said quietly. That's what you want. You're free to leave. All of you. I'll have Anton arrange transportation first thing tomorrow morning. Lena should have felt relieved, should have felt vindicated, but all she felt was hollow. She turned and walked toward the door, her legs shaking so badly she wasn't sure they'd carry her. Lena. She stopped with her hand on the doorknob but didn't turn around. I'm sorry, Rhett said, and his voice sounded broken in a way she'd never heard before. I'm sorry I can't be the man you needed me to be. Lena closed her eyes against the tears threatening to spill over. Then she opened the door and walked out without looking back. Boss. She made it halfway down the hall before the sobs started. Lena pressed her back against the wall and slid down until she was sitting on the floor, her hands pressed over her mouth to muffle the sounds. Her chest hurt like something inside it had cracked open, and she couldn't get enough air no matter how hard she breathed. She'd been so stupid, so desperate to believe someone powerful actually cared about her, that she'd ignored every warning sign, every red flag, every voice in her head screaming that men like Rhett Malone didn't save people without destroying them first. And now she was sitting on the floor of a mansion owned by a criminal, crying over a man she barely knew but had somehow let herself trust anyway. Footsteps echoed down the hallway. Lena looked up, wiping tears from her face, expecting to see Anton or one of the security guards. Instead, she saw Marcus. Her brother stood 10 feet away, his hands shoved in his pockets, his expression tight with something that looked like guilt. "I heard you and Rhett fighting," Marcus said quietly. Lena tried to compose herself, but it was useless. "How much did you hear?" "Enough." Marcus crossed the distance between them and slid down the wall to sit beside her. "Is it true? Was he just using us?" Lena didn't know how to answer that, because the truth was complicated and messy, and she didn't understand it herself. "I think he was doing both," she said finally. "I think he genuinely wanted to help us, but I also think he used the situation to his advantage. And I don't know which one matters more." Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring at the opposite wall. "Does it matter?" he asked. Lena looked at him sharply. "What?" "Does it matter why he did it?" Marcus clarified. "Boyd's in jail. His crew is gone. We're safe. Does it really matter if Rhett had other reasons for helping us?" "Of course it matters," Lena said. "Intent matters. Honesty matters." "Why?" Marcus challenged. "Would you rather we were still living in that apartment with Boyd? Would you rather Mom was still getting hurt? Would you rather I was still watching it happen and not being able to do anything about it?" Lena opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Because Marcus was right. As complicated and manipulative and morally questionable as Rhett's actions might have been, the results were undeniable. They were safe. Boyd was gone. Their lives had fundamentally changed for the better. "I don't know how to reconcile those things," Lena admitted quietly. "I don't know how to be grateful and angry at the same time." "Then maybe don't try," Marcus suggested. "Maybe just accept that life is messy and people are complicated and sometimes the right thing happens for the wrong reasons." Lena leaned her head against her brother's shoulder, exhaustion settling into her bones. "When did you get so wise?" she asked. "I've been paying attention," Marcus said. "Someone had to." They sat there in the hallway for a long time, two siblings who'd survived too much too young, trying to figure out what came next. Eventually, Marcus stood and offered Lena his hand. "Come on," he said. "Mom's probably freaking out wondering where we are." Lena let him pull her to her feet. As they walked back toward the staff quarters, Lena glanced over her shoulder at the closed door to Rhett's study. She wondered if he was still standing there in the dark, carrying the weight of decisions that served everyone and no one at the same time. She wondered if he regretted helping them. She wondered if she regretted trusting him, but most of all, she wondered if either of them would ever be able to forgive the other for being exactly who they were. But morning came too fast and brought with it a decision Lena still wasn't ready to make. Clara had packed their bags before dawn, moving through the room with mechanical efficiency, folding clothes and gathering belongings like she couldn't wait to leave fast enough. Marcus sat on his bed staring at his phone, his expression unreadable. And Lena stood by the window watching the sun rise over Brooklyn, feeling like she was about to make a mistake no matter which choice she made. A knock sounded at the door. Anton stepped inside, his expression as neutral as ever. "Mr. Malone has arranged a car to take you wherever you want to go," he said. "It's waiting at the front entrance. There's also an envelope on the kitchen table addressed to your mother. Mr. Malone asked me to make sure you received it before leaving." Clara looked up sharply. "What kind of envelope?" "I don't open Mr. Malone's correspondence," Anton said simply, "but I suggest you look at it before making your final decision about leaving." He left before any of them could respond. Lena and Clara exchanged glances. "It's probably money," Clara said bitterly. "Payment for services rendered, or hush money to keep us quiet about what we've seen." But when they made their way down to the kitchen and Clara opened the envelope with shaking hands, what fell out wasn't cash. It was a lease agreement. For an apartment in a secure building in Park Slope, fully paid for 1 year, with a security deposit already submitted and keys attached to a small card that read simply, "You deserve to feel safe in your own home. R." Clara's hands trembled so badly, the papers almost slipped from her fingers. Lena stared at the lease, her throat tight, her eyes burning. "He's still trying to control us," Clara whispered. "Don't you see? He's still making decisions for us." But Lena wasn't sure that was true, because Rhett hadn't demanded they stay in his house, hadn't tried to keep them trapped under his protection. He'd given them a way out that didn't require them to go back to the place where Boyd could find them again. He'd given them freedom with safety attached, and that felt less like control and more like, "He's trying to fix it," Lena said quietly. Clara looked at her, tears streaming down her face. "We can't accept this." "Why not?" "Because then we'll owe him forever." "Or maybe," Lena said slowly, "we'll owe him nothing except the decency of acknowledging that someone with power actually used it to help us when they didn't have to." Before Clara could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the kitchen. Lena's heart jumped. But when the door opened, it wasn't Rhett. It was Vincent, the security guard Marcus had argued with 2 days ago. "Mr. Malone asked me to tell you something," Vincent said, looking directly at Lena. "He says he's sorry for not being the man you thought he was, but he hopes the apartment helps you build the life you deserve, and he wants you to know that whether you take it or not, you're under his protection. Always." The message was so unexpected, so raw and honest, that Lena couldn't find words to respond. Vincent nodded once and left, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Clara sank into a chair, the lease agreement still clutched in her hands. Marcus stood in the doorway watching them both, his expression thoughtful. "So what do we do?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. Lena looked at her mother, at her brother, at the keys sitting on the table like a promise or a trap, depending on how you looked at them. And she realized with startling clarity that there was no right answer. Only the choice between running from complicated safety or stepping into the unknown with nothing but hope and fear to guide them. "We take the apartment," Lena said finally. Claire's head snapped up. "Lena, shit!" "And then we decide what comes next," Lena continued firmly. "We don't owe Rhett anything except honesty. And right now, the honest truth is that we need help. We need safety. We need time to figure out who we are without Boyd destroying us. So we take what Rhett's offering, we build our lives. And later, when we're strong enough, we decide if we want him in those lives or not." Clara stared at her for a long moment, then looked down at the lease agreement in her hands. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay?" Marcus moved into the kitchen and placed his hand on Lena's shoulder. "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right call." Lena wasn't sure about that, wasn't sure about anything anymore. But as she picked up the keys and felt their weight in her palm, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences came from trusting a man who lived in the shadows, she was done running from the truth, even if that truth broke her heart before it set her free. They moved into the Park Slope apartment 3 days later. The building was everything their old place wasn't. Secure entrance with a doorman, cameras in every hallway, neighbors who smiled and said hello instead of keeping their heads down and pretending not to notice bruises. The apartment itself was on the 4th floor, 2 bedrooms with actual space to breathe, windows that let in light instead of trapping shadows. Clara cried the first night they slept there. Marcus claimed the smaller bedroom and immediately started making it his own, hanging posters and organizing his books like he was trying to convince himself this wasn't temporary. And Lena stood in the middle of the living room staring at furniture that wasn't theirs, in an apartment they hadn't earned, wondering if safety was supposed to feel this much like guilt. She hadn't seen Rhett since their fight, hadn't heard from him. The moving truck had arrived with their belongings and a note from Anton explaining that all utilities were set up, building security had been briefed, and if they needed anything, they should contact the number at the bottom of the page. Rhett's name wasn't mentioned anywhere. It was like he'd erased himself from the equation entirely, leaving only the safety he'd promised and none of the complications that came with it. Lena should have been relieved. Instead, she felt hollow. On the 5th morning in the new apartment, Lena started her job at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital. The trauma unit was exactly as chaotic and demanding as she'd imagined. 12-hour shifts where seconds mattered and mistakes killed people. She threw herself into the work with desperate intensity, learning routines, memorizing protocols, proving to herself that she was more than just a woman who'd needed saving. She was a nurse. She was capable. She was exactly who she'd fought to become. But every night when her shift ended and she walked out of the hospital into the dark Brooklyn streets, there was a black car waiting. Different driver every time. Never the same face twice. But always there. Watching. Protecting. Rhett keeping his promise from a distance. Lena never acknowledged the cars. Never waved or nodded or indicated she'd noticed them at all. But she knew they were there, and some small, traitorous part of her was grateful for it, even as she resented needing it. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. Life settled into something that almost felt normal. Clara got a job at a bakery near their apartment, finally working somewhere that didn't require her to clean up after people who looked through her like she was invisible. Marcus made friends at his new school, started staying late for basketball practice, came home with bruised knees and genuine smiles. They were healing, slowly, imperfectly, but honestly. And then Boyd got out on bail. Now, Lena was halfway through her shift when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Boyd Carew posted bail 2 hours ago. Stay at the hospital. Don't leave until I get there. R. The phone almost slipped from her hands. Lena's mind went blank with panic, then flooded with 1,000 questions at once. How did Boyd make bail? Where was he now? Did he know where they lived? She tried calling her mother. No answer. Marcus. Straight to voicemail. Terror clawed up Lena's throat like something alive and vicious. She abandoned her station and ran to the staff bathroom, locking herself inside. Her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial the number from Anton's note. He picked up on the first ring. Is my family safe? Lena demanded, her voice cracking. They're fine, Anton said calmly. Your mother is at work with 2 of our men watching the entrances. Your brother is at school with security posted outside. They're both being brought to a secure location now. Where? You don't need to know that yet. Just stay where you are. Mr. Malone is on his way to you. How did Boyd get out? Lena asked, her heart hammering. He was supposed to be held without bail. Someone with money and connections intervened, Anton said grimly. We're working on finding out who. In the meantime, you stay at the hospital. Don't leave. Don't go outside. Don't trust anyone you don't know. Understood? Yes. Anton hung up. Lena stood in the bathroom staring at her reflection in the mirror, pale face, wide eyes, hands trembling like she'd forgotten how to control her own body. This was supposed to be over. Boyd was supposed to be locked away. They were supposed to be safe. But safety was an illusion men like Boyd shattered whenever they wanted to, and Lena was so tired of being afraid. Rhett arrived 40 minutes later. Lena was back at her station trying to appear calm when she saw him striding down the hallway like he owned the building, dressed in a dark suit that made him look like violence wrapped in expensive fabric. Nurses and doctors moved out of his way instinctively, sensing something dangerous in the set of his shoulders, the sharp focus in his eyes. He stopped directly in front of Lena's station. Come with me, he said. It wasn't a request. Lena grabbed her bag and followed him without arguing, too exhausted and terrified to fight about protocol or appearances. They moved through the hospital corridors in tense silence, Rhett's hand hovering near the small of her back without quite touching, guiding her toward the parking garage. A black SUV was waiting with Vincent behind the wheel. Rhett opened the back door and gestured for Lena to get in. She did. He climbed in beside her and the door slammed shut, sealing them inside a space that suddenly felt too small and too intimate. Where are my mom and Marcus? Lena asked before Vincent could even pull out of the parking space. Safe house in Red Hook, Rhett said. Vincent's taking us there now. How did Boyd make bail? Rhett's jaw tightened. Someone paid $200,000 cash. We're tracing the source, but whoever did it covered their tracks well. 200,000, Lena repeated, her voice hollow. Boyd doesn't have that kind of money. No, but the crew he was connected to does. Rhett turned to face her, his gray eyes hard. This isn't about Boyd anymore. It's about his employers using him to get to me. They know hurting you hurts my credibility, makes me look weak, so they bailed him out and they're pointing him at you like a weapon. Lena's stomach twisted. So this is my fault. No, Rhett said sharply. This is their fault for being stupid enough to think they can threaten what's mine and walk away breathing. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it made something fierce and reckless ignite in her chest. I'm not yours, Lena said quietly. Rhett held her gaze. You sure about that? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither of them had the courage to name. Lena looked away first, her pulse racing. The rest of the drive passed in silence. You took this. The safe house was a nondescript brownstone tucked into a residential street that looked too quiet, too normal to be the kind of place where people hid from violence. Vincent parked in the alley behind the building and led them through a reinforced back door that looked like it could withstand a battering ram. Inside, Clara and Marcus were sitting on a worn couch in what looked like a living room that had been stripped of anything personal. Two security guards stood by the windows, their hands resting on weapons Lena couldn't see but knew were there. Clara stood the moment Lena walked in, crossing the room in 3 strides and pulling her daughter into a crushing embrace. Are you okay? Clara whispered against Lena's hair. I'm fine, Mom. Are you? Clara nodded, but Lena could feel her mother trembling. Marcus appeared beside them, his face pale, but his jaw set with determination. What's the plan? Rhett closed the door and locked it, then turned to face all 3 of them. The plan is you stay here until I deal with Boyd permanently, he said flatly. Deal with him how? Lena asked. However I need to. That's not an answer. Rhett crossed the room until he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into his face, the barely controlled rage simmering behind his eyes. The answer is, I'm going to make sure Boyd Carew never threatens you again, Rhett said, his voice low and dangerous. And I'm going to make sure whoever bailed him out understands that using you as leverage was the last mistake they'll ever make. You're going to kill them, Lena said. It wasn't a question. If I have to. Clara made a small sound of distress. Marcus stepped forward, his expression hard. Good. Everyone turned to look at him. Good, Marcus repeated, his voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. Boyd deserves whatever happens to him, and anyone stupid enough to help him deserves it too. Marcus, Clara started. No, Mom, Marcus interrupted. I'm done pretending this is complicated. I'm done acting like there's a moral high ground here. Boyd hurt you. He hurt Lena. He made our lives hell for 5 years. So if Rhett wants to make sure he never hurts anyone again, I'm not going to stand here and pretend that's wrong. The room went completely silent. Rhett studied Marcus for a long moment, something that looked almost like respect flickering across his face. You remind me of myself at your age, Rhett said quietly. Is that supposed to be a compliment? Marcus asked. It's supposed to be a warning. Rhett turned back to Lena. I need to go. Vincent and 2 other men will stay here with you. Don't open the door for anyone. Don't answer your phones unless it's me calling. And if something goes wrong, if Boyd or anyone else finds this location, there's a panic room in the basement. Vincent will show you where. How long will you be gone? Lena asked. As long as it takes. Lena grabbed his arm before he could walk away, her fingers digging into the expensive fabric of his jacket. Don't get yourself killed, she said, and her voice broke on the last word. Rhett looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face, and something raw and vulnerable flashed across his features. I'll come back, he promised. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Rhett covered her hand with his own. Because I'm not done fighting for you yet. The confession landed between them like a bomb. Before Lena could respond, before she could process what he'd just admitted, Rhett pulled away and walked toward the door. He paused with his hand on the handle and looked back at her one last time. When this is over, he said quietly, we're going to finish the conversation we started in my study, the one where you decide if you can forgive me for being exactly who I am. Then he was gone, and Lena was left standing in the middle of a safe house with her family and armed guards, wondering if she'd just watched the man she was falling for walk toward his own death. Sign. The first 6 hours crawled by like torture. Lena paced the living room until Vincent gently suggested she sit down before she wore a hole in the floor. Clara tried to distract herself by organizing the small kitchen, cleaning cabinets that were already clean, wiping down counters that didn't need wiping. Marcus sat on the couch staring at his phone, refreshing news websites every 30 seconds looking for reports of violence in Brooklyn. Nothing. No updates. No calls from Rhett. Just silence and waiting and the suffocating weight of fear pressing down on all of them. At hour 7, Vincent's phone buzzed. Everyone froze. Vincent stepped into the hallway to take the call, his voice too low to hear. When he came back, his expression was carefully neutral. "Mr. Malone has located Boyd," Vincent said. "He's handling the situation now." "What does that mean?" Clara asked, her voice tight. "It means we wait." "For what?" Marcus demanded. "For Rhett to call and tell us it's over? For someone to show up and tell us he's dead?" "For confirmation that the threat has been neutralized," Vincent said calmly. Lena couldn't take it anymore. She stood abruptly and grabbed her jacket from the back of the couch. "Where are you going?" Clara asked, panic rising in her voice. "I need air." "You can't leave," Vincent said, stepping in front of the door. "Mr. Malone's orders." "I don't care about his orders," Lena shot back. "I'm not a prisoner." "You're under protection. There's a difference." "Is there?" Lena's voice rose. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly the same." Vincent's expression didn't change. "I can't let you leave." Lena wanted to scream, wanted to throw something, wanted to do anything except stand in this house waiting for news that might never come. Instead, she turned and walked toward the basement stairs, needing space, needing darkness, needing anything that wasn't the suffocating concern in her mother's eyes or the barely controlled violence in Vincent's stance. The basement was cold and empty except for a reinforced door at the far end, the panic room Rhett had mentioned. Lena sat on the bottom step and buried her face in her hands, trying to slow her racing heart, trying to breathe through the terror lodged in her chest like broken glass. She didn't know how long she sat there before she heard footsteps on the stairs behind her. Marcus. Her brother sat beside her without saying anything, just his presence solid and steady and exactly what she needed. "He's going to be okay," Marcus said finally. "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do, because men like Rhett Malone don't die easy. They're too stubborn, too mean, too used to surviving things that should have killed them." Lena let out a shaky laugh despite everything. "When did you become an expert on men like Rhett?" "I've been watching him," Marcus admitted. "The way he moves, the way his men respond to him, the way he looked at you when he thought no one was paying attention. He's not just some mobster, Lena. He's someone who decided a long time ago that he'd rather be feared than dead. And that kind of person doesn't go down without taking everyone with them." Lena turned to look at her brother, seeing him clearly for the first time in weeks. Not the scared kid who'd shown up at the estate a month ago, but someone older, harder, shaped by violence he'd witnessed, but refusing to let it break him. "I'm terrified," Lena whispered. "Me too," Marcus said. "But we're still here, we're still fighting. That has to count for something." Before Lena could respond, Vincent's voice echoed down the stairs. "Lena, your mother, Marcus, get up here now." The urgency in his tone sent ice down Lena's spine. They scrambled up the stairs and found Vincent standing in the living room with his phone pressed to his ear, his expression grave. Clara was frozen by the window, her face pale as death. "What happened?" Lena demanded. Vincent lowered the phone. "Boyd found the safe house." The words didn't make sense, couldn't make sense. "How?" Clara whispered. "Someone leaked the location," Vincent said grimly. "He's 3 blocks away, with at least 4 men. We need to move to the panic room now." "Where's Rhett?" Lena asked, her voice shaking. "En route, but he won't make it before Boyd does." Vincent pulled a weapon from his jacket and checked the magazine with practiced efficiency. "Marcus, take your mother and sister to the basement. Lock yourselves in the panic room. Do not come out until I tell you it's safe." "What about you?" Marcus asked. "I'll handle Boyd and his men until backup arrives." "That's suicide," Lena said. "There's 4 of them and 1 of you." Vincent's expression didn't change. "Then I better make sure I'm faster." A crash echoed from the front of the house, glass shattering, wood splintering. They were out of time. Vincent shoved Marcus toward the basement stairs. "Go, now." But before any of them could move, the front door exploded inward, the reinforced lock ripped from the frame by something heavy and brutal. Boyd Carew stood in the doorway holding a crowbar, his face twisted with rage and alcohol, and something wild that looked like madness. Behind him, 3 men with weapons drawn fanned out into the living room. Vincent raised his gun. One of Boyd's men fired first. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space, and Vincent went down hard, blood blooming across his shoulder. Clara screamed. Marcus lunged forward, but Lena grabbed him and pulled him back, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might explode. Boyd's eyes locked on Lena, and he smiled, a grotesque, broken thing that made her blood turn to ice. "There you are," he said, his words slurring. Thought you could hide from me. Thought that mobster boyfriend could keep you safe." He took a step forward, the crowbar swinging loosely at his side. Lena pushed Marcus and Clara behind her, putting herself between them and the man who destroyed their lives for 5 years. "Stay back," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Boyd laughed. "Or what? You gonna stop me?" "No," a voice said from the shattered doorway. "But I am." Everyone turned. Rhett Malone stood in the entrance with a gun in each hand and an expression on his face that looked like death incarnate. Boyd's smile faltered. "You're too late," Boyd spat. "I'm already here. Already got what I came for." "You haven't got anything," Rhett said, his voice cold and final, "except maybe one last chance to walk away breathing." "You think I'm scared of you?" Boyd shouted, but his hands were shaking now. "You should be." Boyd raised the crowbar. Rhett fired. The shot echoed through the house like thunder, and Boyd crumpled to the floor, the crowbar clattering from his hands. The 3 men behind him raised their weapons, but Rhett was already moving, faster than Lena thought possible for someone his size. 2 more shots, precise and brutal, and 2 men went down screaming. The 3rd man bolted for the back door. Rhett let him run. Then the room went completely silent except for the sound of Boyd whimpering on the floor, clutching his leg where Rhett's bullet had torn through muscle and bone. Rhett crossed the room slowly, deliberately, until he was standing over Boyd with both guns still raised. "You had a choice," Rhett said quietly. "You could have stayed in jail, served your time, disappeared. But you chose this. You chose to come after them." "They're mine," Boyd gasped through the pain. "My family. You had no right." "They were never yours," Rhett interrupted, his voice dropping into something dark and absolute. "And you lost the right to call them family the first time you put your hands on them." He pressed the barrel of the gun against Boyd's forehead. Lena's breath stopped. "Rhett, don't," she heard herself say, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. Rhett looked up at her, his gray eyes meeting hers across the blood-stained living room. "Give me one good reason," he said. Lena opened her mouth, searching for words, searching for justification, searching for any argument that made sense. But all she could see was Boyd on the floor, broken, terrified, pathetic, and suddenly she couldn't remember why she'd ever been afraid of him at all. "Because I need you here," she said finally, "not in prison for murder, not carrying that weight. Here, with me." Something shifted in Rhett's expression. He lowered the gun slowly, stepping back from Boyd. "You're lucky," Rhett said to Boyd. "Lucky she's a better person than either of us deserve." Then he turned to the men still standing behind him. More security, backup that had arrived while Lena wasn't paying attention. "Get him out of here," Rhett ordered. "Call the police. Tell them Boyd Carew violated his bail conditions by attempting armed home invasion. Make sure the charges stick this time." The men moved immediately, dragging Boyd from the house while he screamed threats and curses that no one bothered listening to anymore. Rhett crossed the room to where Lena stood with her family, holstering his weapons. "Is everyone okay?" he asked. Clara nodded, tears streaming down her face. Marcus stared at Rhett like he'd just witnessed something religious. "And Lena?" Lena reached up and pressed her hand against Rhett's chest, feeling his heartbeat thundering beneath her palm. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised I would. You could have killed him." "I know." "Why didn't you?" Rhett covered her hand with his own, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "Because you asked me not to," he said simply, "and I'm done making decisions without considering what you need." The admission hung between them, raw and honest and more terrifying than any violence they'd just survived. Behind them, Vincent groaned from where he'd fallen, and the spell broke. The next hour blurred together, paramedics arriving, police taking statements, crime scene techs photographing blood spatter and broken furniture. Boyd was taken away in an ambulance under armed guard, facing charges that would keep him locked up for decades. By the time dawn broke over Brooklyn, the threat was finally, truly over. And Lena stood in the ruins of a safe house that hadn't kept them safe at all, wondering if anywhere would ever feel secure again, or if safety was something you built inside yourself, one terrifying choice at a time, until you finally stopped running from the darkness and learned to face it head on. Rhett found her standing alone in the kitchen while her family gave statements in the other room. He didn't say anything, just stood beside her, his presence solid and steady and exactly what she needed. "I'm sorry," Lena said quietly. "For what?" "For doubting you. For thinking you were using us. For not trusting that you meant what you said." Rhett turned to face her, his expression soft in a way she'd never seen before. "You had every right to doubt me," he said. "I gave you plenty of reasons. But I meant what I said in my study, Lena. I'm not a good man. I'm probably not the man you should trust. But I'm the man who will burn down this entire city before I let anyone hurt you again." Lena's throat tightened with emotion she couldn't name. "Is that supposed to be romantic?" she asked, her voice breaking. "It's supposed to be honest." And somehow, that was exactly what she needed to hear. Lena reached up and cupped Rhett's face in her hands, her thumbs brushing across the stubble on his jaw. "When this is really over," she said, "when Boyd is locked away and the dust settles and we finally have time to breathe, I want to finish that conversation." "Which one?" "The one where I decide if I can forgive you for being exactly who you are." Rhett's hands came up to cover hers, his eyes searching her face. "And if you can't?" he asked quietly. Lena smiled despite everything, despite the exhaustion and fear and blood still drying on the floor. "Then I guess we'll figure out how to move forward anyway," she said. "Because I think I'm done running from complicated things just because they scare me." Rhett pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. "Good," he whispered, "because I'm done pretending I don't need you." And in the wreckage of a night that should have destroyed them, two broken people who'd somehow found each other in the darkness finally stopped fighting against the inevitable and let themselves fall. The aftermath came in pieces. Boyd Carew was charged with attempted murder, armed home invasion, and violation of bail conditions. The district attorney added kidnapping charges when they found evidence he'd planned to take Marcus hostage. Combined with his previous convictions for domestic violence and assault, the judge set bail at $2 million, an amount nobody was willing or stupid enough to post. Boyd would spend the next 20 years behind bars. Minimum. The crew that had bailed him out the first time scattered like roaches when light hit them. Rhett's network tracked down 3 of the 4 men who'd backed Boyd's final attack. They disappeared into the legal system, facing charges ranging from conspiracy to attempted murder. The 4th man, the one who'd run, was found 3 days later trying to board a bus to Philadelphia with a broken arm and a story about tripping down stairs that nobody believed. Vincent recovered from his gunshot wound and returned to work 2 weeks later with a scar he wore like a badge and a raise he pretended not to care about. And Lena, Clara, and Marcus moved back into the Park Slope apartment that suddenly felt less like a cage and more like the fresh start they'd been fighting for since the night they left Boyd behind. But safety, Lena was learning, wasn't something that arrived all at once like a package delivered to your door. It was something you built slowly, one day at a time, through choices that forced you to trust yourself when trusting anyone else felt impossible. The nightmares came first. Lena would wake at 3 in the morning with her heart hammering and Boyd's face burned into her retinas, his hands reaching for her mother, his voice screaming threats that echoed long after she opened her eyes. Clara had them too. Lena could hear her mother pacing the living room at night, could see the exhaustion carved into her face at breakfast, could feel the weight of trauma neither of them knew how to carry alone. Marcus pretended he was fine. He went to school, played basketball, came home and did his homework like nothing had changed. But Lena caught him staring at the front door sometimes, his body tense, his hands curled into fists like he was preparing for an attack that would never come. They were free. But they were also learning that freedom didn't erase the scars violence left behind. It just gave you space to finally feel them. Rhett stayed away for 2 weeks after the safe house. Lena told herself it was for the best. Told herself they both needed time to process what had happened, to figure out who they were outside of crisis and fear and violence. Told herself that the hollow ache in her chest every time she thought about him was just residual trauma and not something deeper, more dangerous, more real. She was lying to herself. She knew it. But lying was easier than admitting she'd fallen for a man whose world was built on blood and whose promises came wrapped in threats. On the 15th day, Rhett called. Lena was walking home from a late shift at the hospital, exhaustion dragging at her bones, when her phone buzzed with a number she'd deleted 3 times, but somehow still recognized. She answered before she could talk herself out of it. "Hi." "Hi." Rhett's voice was rough, like he'd been awake for days. "How are you?" The question was so normal, so mundane, that Lena almost laughed. Tired, she said honestly, trying to figure out how to sleep through the night without waking up terrified. Yeah, I know that feeling. Silence stretched between them, heavy with things neither knew how to say. I'm sorry I haven't called sooner, Rhett said finally. I thought you needed space. I did, Lena admitted. But I also... She stopped, searching for words that felt true. I also missed hearing your voice. She heard Rhett exhale, the sound shaky and unsteady. Can I see you? He asked quietly. Lena's heart stuttered. When? Now. I'm outside your building. Lena stopped walking and looked up. Rhett stood on the sidewalk 20 feet away, phone pressed to his ear, wearing jeans and a dark jacket instead of the expensive suit she'd grown used to. He looked different somehow, smaller, more human, less like the monster Brooklyn whispered about, and more like a man who'd forgotten how to stop carrying the weight of other people's survival. Lena ended the call and crossed the distance between them slowly. They stood facing each other in the glow of streetlights while the city moved around them, two people who'd survived too much to pretend the damage didn't matter. You look tired, Lena said. So do you. I had a 12-hour shift. I had a war. Rhett's smile was bitter. Different kind of exhausting. Lena studied his face, the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands stayed shoved in his pockets, like he didn't trust himself to reach for her. Is it over? She asked. Really over? Boyd's locked up. His crew is scattered. The people who bailed him out the first time won't make that mistake again. Rhett paused. So yeah, it's over. Then why do you still look like you're fighting? The question landed harder than Lena intended. Rhett looked away, his jaw working like he was trying to swallow words that tasted like glass. Because I don't know how to stop, he admitted finally. I've spent 20 years fighting to survive, fighting to build an empire, fighting to protect the people who depend on me. And now that the immediate threat is gone, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with myself. Lena took a step closer. You could try living. Rhett's eyes snapped back to hers, something raw and vulnerable flickering across his face. I don't remember how, he said quietly. Then maybe it's time to learn. The words hung between them like a challenge and a promise. Rhett reached out slowly, carefully, like he was testing whether she'd pull away. His fingers brushed against hers, then curled around her hand, holding on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored. I meant what I said that night, Rhett said, his voice rough. I'm not a good man. I've done things that would make you walk away if you knew the details. But I'm trying to be better. For you, for myself, for the version of me that died the day I gave up on medical school and chose violence instead. Lena squeezed his hand. Then finish what you started. Rhett blinked. What? Medical school. You said you gave it up. So go back, finish your degree, become the doctor you wanted to be before the world turned you into something else. Lena, I run a criminal empire. Then find someone to run it for you, Lena interrupted. Or dismantle it, or walk away entirely. I don't care which. But don't stand here and tell me you're trying to be better while refusing to actually change anything. The challenge in her voice was sharp and uncompromising. Rhett stared at her like she'd just suggested he fly to the moon. You make it sound simple, he said. It's not simple. It's terrifying and complicated and probably impossible. But so was surviving Boyd. So was standing in that safe house while bullets flew. So was choosing to trust you when every instinct I had told me men like you destroy women like me. Lena stepped closer, closing the distance until they were inches apart. I'm done playing it safe, she said quietly. I'm done letting fear make my decisions. So if you want to be part of my life, if you actually mean what you said about trying to be better, then prove it. Show me you're willing to walk away from the empire and become the man you were supposed to be. Rhett's hand tightened around hers, his eyes searching her face like he was trying to memorize every detail. And if I can't? He asked. Then we say goodbye now, Lena said, her voice breaking. Because I can't love someone who's only half alive. I can't watch you destroy yourself trying to be two different people at once. So you choose, the empire or the future, violence or medicine, the monster or the man. The ultimatum hung in the air between them, brutal and necessary. Rhett pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers, his breath warm against her skin. You're asking me to give up everything I've built, he whispered. I'm asking you to choose what you want to build next. Rhett closed his eyes, and Lena could feel the war raging inside him. Decades of survival instinct battling against the dream he'd buried so long ago he'd forgotten it was still bleeding. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. Okay, he said, his voice rough. Okay, I'll do it. You'll go back to medical school? I'll try. I don't know if they'll even accept me after. They will, Lena interrupted. Because you're brilliant and stubborn, and you've spent 20 years keeping people alive in ways most doctors never have to think about. So yes, they'll accept you. And yes, you'll finish. And yes, you'll become the doctor you were always meant to be. Rhett let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like a sob. You have a lot of faith in me. Someone has to. He kissed her then, soft and desperate, and filled with promises neither of them knew if they could keep. Lena kissed him back, her hands fisting in his jacket, holding on like he might disappear if she let go. When they finally pulled apart, Rhett rested his forehead against hers again, both of them breathing hard. This is going to be messy, he warned. Everything worth having is messy. I'm going to fail sometimes, make mistakes, relapse into old patterns. Then I'll be there to call you on it. You're terrifying, you know that? Lena smiled despite everything. Good. You need someone terrifying in your life to keep you honest. Rhett laughed, a real laugh this time, genuine and unguarded, and pulled her into a hug that felt like coming home after a war. They stood there on the sidewalk while Brooklyn moved around them, two people who'd survived violence and fear and their own worst instincts, finally choosing something other than survival. They were choosing each other, and that felt more dangerous and more right than anything either of them had ever done. Checkum. 3 months later, Rhett Malone enrolled in Columbia's post-baccalaureate pre-medical program. The news spread through Brooklyn's underground like wildfire. The most feared mob boss in the borough was sitting in lecture halls studying biochemistry and anatomy instead of running his empire. People whispered about it in bars and back rooms, trying to figure out the angle, the strategy, the hidden reason behind the decision. But there was no angle. Just a man trying to become something other than the violence that had defined him. Rhett handed control of his operations to his second-in-command, a woman named Sophia who'd been running logistics for a decade and had the intelligence and ruthlessness to keep the empire stable. He kept minimal involvement, just enough to ensure the transition didn't cause a power vacuum that would get people killed. But he was clear about his intentions. He was walking away. Slowly. Carefully. But permanently. The first semester nearly broke him. Rhett would come to Lena's apartment after classes, exhausted and frustrated, his hands shaking from stress instead of violence for the first time in 20 years. He'd spread textbooks across her kitchen table and work until 2 in the morning, memorizing formulas and anatomical structures like his life depended on it. Lena would sit across from him, reviewing her own nursing journals, occasionally reaching over to correct his work or explain concepts he'd missed. They'd fallen into a rhythm, two people rebuilding themselves in parallel, supporting each other through transformations that felt impossible most days. Clara watched them with something that looked like cautious hope. Marcus declared Rhett actually pretty cool for an old guy, after Rhett helped him with a physics project. And slowly, piece by careful piece, they built something that felt less like survival and more like an actual life. But the past had a way of catching up. The attack came on a Tuesday night in February. Lena was walking home from the hospital when a car pulled up beside her. Black sedan, tinted windows, engine idling. Her heart jumped into her throat, muscle memory from Boyd's violence flooding her system with adrenaline. The window rolled down. A woman leaned out, mid-40s, sharp features, expensive clothes. Not one of Boyd's crew. Someone else entirely. "Lena Voss?" the woman asked. Lena's hand moved toward her phone. "Who's asking?" "Someone who needs to speak with Rhett Malone. And since he's not answering my calls, I thought I'd go through you." Every instinct Lena had screamed danger. "I don't know what you're talking about," Lena said, backing away. The woman sighed. "My name is Sophia Chen. I run Rhett's operations now, or I'm trying to, but there's a problem, and I need his help fixing it before people die." Lena stopped moving. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where one of our supply chains got hijacked by a crew out of Queens who think Rhett walking away means we're weak. They killed 2 of our people yesterday. They'll kill more tomorrow if we don't respond. And I need Rhett to tell me how he wants me to handle it, because this is exactly the kind of situation where the wrong move starts a war. Lena's stomach twisted. Rhett doesn't run your operations anymore. I know, but he built this empire. He knows these people, and he's the only one they'll actually listen to if things escalate. Sophia's expression was grim. I'm not asking him to come back. I'm asking him to help me keep people alive long enough for me to establish my own authority. After that, he can go back to studying whatever the hell he's studying. Lena wanted to say no, wanted to protect Rhett from being dragged back into the violence he was fighting so hard to escape. But 2 people were already dead, and more would follow if nobody intervened. I'll tell him, Lena said finally, but the decision is his. Sophia nodded. Fair enough. Here's my number. Tell him to call me before midnight. After that, I'm making executive decisions, and people are going to die. She handed Lena a card through the window, then the sedan pulled away, disappearing into Brooklyn traffic. Lena stood on the sidewalk staring at the card in her hand, feeling the weight of a choice she shouldn't have to make pressing down on her shoulders. Beck. Rhett arrived at her apartment 20 minutes after she called. He took one look at her face and knew something was wrong. What happened? Lena handed him Sophia's card and explained the situation. The hijacked supply chain, the murders, the threat of escalation. Rhett listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with every word. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. I can't, he said finally, his voice tight. I can't go back to that world, not even for one night. Because if I do, I'll never fully leave. The violence will always be there, waiting for an excuse to pull me back. I know, Lena said quietly. But if I don't help Sophia, people will die. Good people who trusted me to build something stable enough to survive my absence. I know that too. Rhett dragged his hands through his hair, frustration and guilt warring across his face. So what the hell am I supposed to do? Lena crossed the room and took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. You call Sophia, she said firmly. You give her advice. You tell her how to navigate the situation without starting a war, but you do it from here, on the phone. Without stepping foot back into that world. You use your knowledge to save lives without using your hands to end them. That's the compromise. Rhett's eyes searched hers. And if that's not enough? If Sophia needs me there in person to make it work? Then you tell her no, Lena said, because I need you here more than they need you there. And if you walk back into that world, I'm not sure you'll ever walk out again. The words were harsh and honest and exactly what Rhett needed to hear. He closed his eyes, his jaw clenching, then nodded slowly. Okay, he whispered. Okay, I'll call her. He pulled out his phone and dialed Sophia's number, putting it on speaker so Lena could hear. Sophia picked up on the first ring. About time. I'm not coming back, Rhett said immediately, but I'll help you navigate this. Tell me everything. For the next 2 hours, Rhett and Sophia worked through strategy like they were planning a military operation. Rhett asked questions, identified key players, suggested approaches that would de-escalate without making Sophia look weak. His mind worked with terrifying precision, analyzing angles and consequences most people would never see. But his hands never reached for a weapon. His voice never rose in anger. He was advising, not commanding, consulting, not controlling. And when Sophia finally said she had enough to work with, Rhett ended the call and sat in silence, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. You did good, Lena said quietly. I sent her into a situation that could get her killed. You gave her the tools to navigate it safely. There's a difference. Rhett looked up at her, exhaustion and doubt written across his face. What if I can't do this? What if every crisis pulls me back? What if I spend the rest of my life caught between 2 worlds, never fully belonging to either? Lena sat beside him and took his hand. Then we figure it out together. One crisis at a time. One choice at a time. Until eventually the choices get easier and the pull gets weaker and you finally believe you deserve the life you're building. Rhett's fingers tightened around hers. I don't know what I did to deserve you. You chose to be better, Lena said simply. That's enough. They sat together in the quiet apartment while Brooklyn hummed outside the windows. Two people learning that redemption wasn't a destination you reached, but a direction you kept moving toward, even when the path felt impossible. 3 days later, Sophia called to report the situation was resolved. No additional casualties. The crew from Queens had backed down after she'd demonstrated she had the intelligence and resources to retaliate effectively. Rhett's advice had worked. And for the first time since walking away from his empire, Rhett allowed himself to believe he might actually survive the transition. Spring arrived slowly over Brooklyn, bringing with it warmth and light and the kind of hope that felt almost dangerous after so much darkness. Clara started therapy. Real therapy with a trauma specialist who helped her understand that survival wasn't the same as healing and that choosing to feel the pain was sometimes the only way to move past it. Marcus made varsity basketball. He came home one afternoon with a jersey that had his name across the back. Grinning so wide, Lena thought his face might split, and for the first time since Boyd, he looked like a kid instead of a soldier. And Lena finally stopped looking over her shoulder. She walked through Brooklyn at night without fear tightening her chest. She slept through the night without waking in panic. She laughed without guilt, loved without reservation, and slowly learned to trust that safety wasn't something that could be stolen the moment she let her guard down. On a Saturday morning in late April, Rhett showed up at her apartment with coffee and bagels and an envelope he was trying very hard to pretend wasn't important. "What's that?" Lena asked, eyeing the envelope suspiciously. Rhett set the coffee down and handed it to her without meeting her eyes. "Just open it." Lena tore open the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was an acceptance letter, Columbia Medical School. Lena's breath caught in her throat. "You got in," she whispered. "Apparently intelligence and real-world experience count for something," Rhett said, but his voice was shaking. "I start in September. 4 years. Then residency. Then—" He stopped, overwhelmed. Lena threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you." Rhett held her tight, his face buried in her hair. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." They stood there in her kitchen holding each other while coffee went cold and bagels were forgotten. Two people who'd survived impossible things, finally believing they deserved impossible futures. The years that followed weren't easy. Medical school was brutal. Rhett worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life, studying until exhaustion blurred his vision, failing exams and retaking them, slowly learning that intelligence wasn't enough. You also needed humility and patience and the willingness to accept that you'd never know everything. Lena supported him through every crisis, every breakdown, every moment when he wanted to quit because the weight felt too heavy. And Rhett supported her in return. When Lena was promoted to head nurse in the trauma unit, he was there celebrating. When Clara finally moved into her own apartment, a small studio in Sunset Park that she'd saved for and earned herself, he helped her move furniture. When Marcus graduated high school with a full scholarship to NYU, Rhett sat in the audience beside Lena and Clara, clapping until his hands hurt. They built a life together, not perfect, not without scars, but honest in ways that mattered more than perfection ever could. And somewhere between medical school lectures and hospital shifts, between family dinners and quiet nights reading together on Lena's couch, Rhett Malone stopped being the man everyone feared and became the man he'd always wanted to be. A healer instead of a destroyer. A builder instead of a survivor. Someone who saved lives instead of ending them. 5 years after the night Boyd attacked the safe house, Lena stood in the gallery at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital watching Rhett perform his first solo surgery as a resident. He moved with the same precision she'd seen him use in violence, but now it was channeled into something that created life instead of ending it. His hands were steady as he sutured an arterial bleed, his voice calm as he directed the team around him, his focus absolute. When the surgery was over and the patient was stable, Rhett stepped out of the OR and pulled off his mask. His eyes found Lena's through the observation window. She pressed her hand against the glass. He pressed his against the other side, and even through barriers and distance, Lena felt the connection between them, solid and unbreakable, and earned through every choice they'd made to be better than the violence that had tried to define them. Later, when his shift ended and they walked out of the hospital into the warm summer night, Rhett pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" for seeing who I could be when I'd forgotten myself. Lena smiled and took his hand. That's what love does. It remembers the person you're becoming even when you can't see them yet. They walked through Brooklyn together as the city settled into evening. Two people who'd been broken by violence and rebuilt by choice, finally at peace with the lives they'd fought so hard to claim. The monster everyone had feared was gone, and in his place stood a man who'd learned that the hardest battles weren't fought with fists and weapons. They were fought with honesty and courage, and the terrifying decision to choose healing over survival, to choose love over fear, to choose becoming over remaining. And in the end, that was the only victory that mattered.